It is wonderful to welcome on board Martyn Ware. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fantastic. We're in the Groucho Club.
Yes, we are. Very famous, isn't it? This is actually the snooker room where I think one of the Gallaghers smashed a snooker cue in half and attacked someone. But anyway, it's a legendary place for rock and roll and the media.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this illustrious venue today.
Yeah, that's right. Illustrious. Very appropriate.
There's a million things we could talk about, but I'm very excited. You Heaven 17, something new coming up.
Yeah, for the first time in 14 years, we're writing a new album. Myself and Glenn, we finally got around to it. We do a lot of live work, and people have been saying, "Oh, why don't you do some new stuff?" And we're going, "Well, there's no money in it, you know. Really, not many people are buying CDs nowadays." But do you know what? We're doing it because we love music and we want to do it, and we can always cite at the gigs anyway. And we do loads of gigs, so we should be okay. And actually, we feel inspired, particularly by the current political situation, because that was a big inspiration for us in the early 80s. It seems like history is repeating itself.
The sound of Heaven 17, I think, was very forward-thinking back in the 80s. What's the sound of Heaven 17 going to be like in the 21st century, do you think?
Do you know what? It'd be quite nice to be still pushing the boundaries a little bit. We always try to. And I remember when we did the stuff in the early 80s, our avowed intention was to do something that would have longevity. And of course, back in those days, when we were like in our early 20s, we were going, yeah, we want people still to be listening to this in 10 years' time. And look where we are now. It's 30 years on, and our audiences for our live shows are getting bigger and bigger.
That's amazing. You mentioned that you're doing lots and lots of live shows. Do you love the live performance experience?
What's not to like about performing live, if you think about it? Because to think that people are still willing to pay good money to come and see us perform live after 30 years is quite an astonishing thing, you know, to us. We're very proud of the stuff that we created back then, but also we're very happy to play it to a new audience. You know, I mean, I'd say about 25% of our audiences are like in their 20s. Well, if you think about it, the 80s clubs in Britain, it's not people my age or your age who are going to them, it's people in their 20s. The 80s has become a fashionable meme, if you like, for the 20s generation. So we get a lot of people. I mean, I'm very active on Twitter and Facebook and everything, and the number of people who contact me are in their, you know, sometimes in their teens and 20s who are going on about Heaven 17 stuff, because it matters less and less to people nowadays when things were created. It's just whether they like them or not.
What about another name from the 80s? You mentioned Blancmange.
Yes, well, we're just about to announce, actually, by the time this comes out, it will have been announced, that we're doing a tour with Blancmange in the autumn, probably late October, first 2 weeks of November in the UK, all around the UK. We really like the guys, the fellow Northerners. They're from Blackburn, and we're from Sheffield. So, and I really like their stuff, and they're a really good match for us. So we are going to be touring together, and hopefully it'll be a fantastic tour. We're thinking about calling it the Synthetic Delights Tour.
I love that.
Inspired by Angel Delight. We were trying to think of Blancmange, some kind of pun on dessert, you know.
I'll be in heaven.
Heavenly desserts or something, you know. Oh, yeah, actually, I think that was, yeah, I remember that.
Not only creating music, tell me about Illustrious. So you're creating big things.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. Well, this is really looking forward. As I've always tried to do in my career. I formed a company in the year 2000 with Vince Clarke from Erasure called Illustrious, and the idea was to create three-dimensional immersive soundscapes for art installations, for museums, for big public art stuff. And during the last 14 years, it's proved to be very successful, and it's still cutting edge now. It's getting more popular. So we've done things all over the world. If you look at our website, which is illustriouscompany.co.uk, there's a world map showing where all the places in the world that we've done installations. But the ones that I'm most proud of, I suppose, are we've done Trafalgar Square, we've done Leicester Square in London, We've done the whole of the Millennium Bridge during the Olympics for 8 weeks. Created a looping 1 hour composition all about the river and everything. It was beautiful. And we are currently looking at doing major projects in Liverpool, and we're looking at. We'd love to do something in Tokyo about it.
I was just about to say, is Japan in the list?
I think I need to talk to you afterwards about this. We've never done anything in Japan, so that would be fantastic. And it's the sort of thing I think people in Japan would love. And we are currently, luckily, we are on the list of top 100 creative companies in Britain that UK Trade and Investment are, the British government, in other words, are trying to encourage us to get out to export more. So that would suit us fine, actually.
Please come to Japan. And I think, like you said, I mean, these big soundscapes, that the Japanese would love that.
Yeah. Well, we work a lot with kind of architects and urban planners to create kind of surprising ambiences and interventions in urban environments. Because let's face it, cities are going to get more and more crowded in the future and more kind of stressful. And what we do, it's not like whale song or something. I mean, it's not just ambient music. It's all sorts of things, from narrative through to, you know, sometimes it's rhythmic, sometimes electronic, sometimes real instruments. But with our system, we can place individual sounds in 3 dimensions in mid-air and make them pass through your body and give you a thrill, basically.
Actually, that's interesting you mentioned about architects and developers and planners. Do they think about sound?
It's a very good question. I've spent probably more time evangelizing about this to architectural practices. I've lectured at the Architectural Association and the Bartlett, which are very famous architectural schools in London, to various high-profile architectural practices around the world. I've lectured all over the world about this stuff. It's amazing how little training architects in 7 years of training have about acoustics. It's normally about a week in 7 years. So they treat it as a problem to be solved rather than a creative possibility, and that's the tipping point we need to get to.
Do you have a favourite sound?
That's a very good question. Yes. Do I have a favourite sound? I'm very fond of kind of natural sounds. I mean, I'm very fond of things like waterfalls and babbling brooks and that sort of thing. I think, and the sound of the sea, really, I suppose, is my favourite. Crashing waves is a real favourite of mine. In fact, we did a seascape, what we call a seascape, a sea soundscape, which we were commissioned by a publishing company, Macmillan, to accompany the launch of a book by an author called Tim Winton called Breath. And it was a coming-of-age book, teenagers in Australia, all about surfing. And we thought, well, why don't we have Tim reading his book over the top of this beautiful crashing soundscape? And we actually installed this under Hungerford Bridge in London, next to the Thames, and it was just near to a Foyle's bookshop for the launch, so people could buy the book. And they had people handing out leaflets. But as they went under the bridge, they heard, if you were blind, it would have sounded like the real sea in 3 dimensions. And you could see people going past, going, that can't be the river making that noise. And then they'd kind of turn around and come back. And so it worked really well. They sold about 5 times more books that day, I think.
What do you think the sound of London is? I love to walk around and randomly record sounds on the tube, on the streets, wherever. Do you think London has a sound?
Well, funnily enough, I did an installation called Sound Life London, which was precisely that, is asking people whether they... we asked community groups and youth groups and reminiscence groups from old age pensioners and stuff, what their sounds of London are, what they thought the typical sounds of London were. Gave them recording devices and then let them keep the recording devices and say, don't just go out and record anything. Think about what is different about here to everywhere else you might go. And so we collected all these recordings after a few months and created a 1 hour long soundscape in Leicester Square, which we combined with some of our own compositions as well. The typical sounds of London, I suppose the markets are very indicative, aren't they? And are very particular. And markets around the world are. And And things like we recorded as many of the bells of London as we could. So one part of the soundscape was all the bells of London going off in the right direction from Leicester Square simultaneously at the wrong time. By the way, it was like 7 minutes past the hour, and people going, because it all sounded very real, right? We had it just the right level. So the sounds of London, yeah, things like that, and things like, if you're talking about interiors, things like the House of Parliament, and or the sound of water down by the river. There are many things. I mean, sporting stuff. Music is a very important thing in London. It's very interesting once you start considering the world of sound. It makes you think about the world in an entirely different experiential way, because we're so visually led, aren't we? We think of the world, how does it look? It's like architects think the same. They look at their diagrams, they look at their 3D models that they make, and all they think about is how it looks. They don't really think about the experience of the people that are going to occupy the building or be near the building.
It's actually interesting you mentioned about visual, because the world has become so visual. Hence the reason I'm video recording this interview. I'm a radio guy. I love radio. I love sound. Do you think people are going to forget about sound with so much visual impact?
Well, funnily enough, I'm right at the heart of all this stuff. My world is sound. What I've seen happening in the last decade is that people are starting to appreciate sound more and understand the future of kind of sensory experiences, shall we say. So, I'll give you an example. We recently did an installation at the National Portrait Gallery in London, where we, as part of it, we were trying to persuade the National Portrait Gallery that they should have a sensory gallery, rather than just looking at portraits in paint or photography or whatever on the wall. Why not consider the meaning of a human existence in all the senses? So we actually got, for instance, a smell artist, a friend of mine called Sissel Talas from Berlin, who came across and created a special perfume about one of the people whose portraits was on the wall. We had a sound artist creating a 3D soundscape based around Queen Elizabeth's love letters to one of her lovers, for instance. And then we had more contemporary stuff as well. And they're still considering it. And I just thought, for people who don't have all their senses, what a fantastic boon that would be. Blind people, maybe some deaf people too. So we want people to consider the future of immersive experience, and sound is a very, very big part of that.
We've talked about Heaven 17. We talked about Blancmange. Do you have any other favourite music you can recommend that I should play on my radio show?
Oh, I say, that's a big one, isn't it? Oh God, there's so many pieces of music I love, and I DJ as well. Oh. So I'll come and DJ for you.
Please, come and DJ on the aeroplane with me.
Yeah, actually, I'd love to do that. We'll talk about that afterwards. I'm fond of electronic music, but it's not the only thing. I mean, I like funk and I like classical music. I like experimental music. I mean, there are some really good contemporary bands that I like. I like Everything. I'm very fond of that band. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but and there are some a lot of bands now are taking influence from the 80s, and that's quite kind of interesting to me, because some of them sound quite a lot like us. I mean, I'm good friends with LaRue, with Ellie from LaRue, who have just released a new album, which is coming out shortly. And their new album, a lot of it sounds quite a lot like M17. And we're good mates, and we've done some stuff on the BBC before together. And, I mean, she's in her early 20s. So it shows that there is an appreciation for good music from the past, which is still being recycled into the new world.
Well, I think it just fits in so well, electro-pop music at the end of the day.
Yeah, and, the tools that we used at that time, I mean, in my studio, I've still got the original synths that I used to create the first Human League albums, and I still use them. In fact, I just created a sample library for a company based on the original synths that I used, and everybody's clamouring for it, so it shows the appetite is there for people.
Back to the UK. Summertime, favourite spot or a favourite thing you love to do in the summertime in the UK?
In the UK? I'm very lucky because we get to play all sorts of festivals in beautiful locations. So, but to be honest, I love the seaside. So, on a beautiful summer's day, there's not much can beat, you know, being at the seaside, really. I mean, prefer it where it's not too crowded, but I mean, I love Brighton, for instance, very fond of Brighton. The whole south coast, Cornwall, I love places like Aldeburgh and the east coast as well. And of course, coming from Sheffield, when I was young, we used to go for day trips to Scarborough and Whitby and Cleethorpes and places like that, you know. So yeah, the sea really. And until excuse me, until recently, I had for 20 years I had an apartment in Venice. So I'm clearly in love with the sea.
Martyn Ware, we could talk forever. We need to meet and talk again. But for today, thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.